بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام والتسليم على سيدنا مولانا وحبيبنا قرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه من اهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. So we continue inshallah reading from the Mukhtasar of Imam Jamra rahimahullah up to the 20th hadith in your text, page 63. قال الإمام ابن جمرة رحمه الله في الدارين آمين. عن عائشة أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: إذا نعس أحدكم وهو يصلي فليرقد حتى يذهب عنه النوم، فإن أحدكم إذا صلى وهو ناعس لا يدري لعله يستغفر فيصب نفسه. So Aisha narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, if one of you falls asleep, actually, that's not the right translation. If one of you feels sleepy, not falls asleep. Because in Na'as, and Nu'as is actually the feeling of sleep. It's not actual sleep. Then he would have said, إِذَا نَامَ أَحَدُكُمْ. He should rest until his sleepiness goes away, and that proves it, the rest of the hadith. Because if you pray while sleepy, one may try to make istighfar but end up cursing himself. So this hadith, one might wonder why this particular one, the Imam Abdullah ibn Jamrah, you picked this one, because there's many ahadith coming in the chapters dealing with prayer and tahara and so forth, but he chose this one, right? And remember that there's about 300 or so, a little bit more than that, hadith that he chose out of the few thousand that Imam Bukhari includes in his Sahih. So obviously he had a particular methodology for choosing the hadith that he was choosing. And like we said earlier, he sought to, as he mentions in his introduction, that every hadith is kind of like a book in of itself. Kind of like something that gives you sort of what we'd say a taster of what are the particular fawaid, yani things that one should come away with, and concepts. And it's not just merely the text of the particular ruling that comes from the hadith. That's why he didn't include these chapter headings. The chapter headings are actually from Bukhari. He doesn't include them in his Mukhtasar. So he doesn't have Bab al-Nu'as fi salah. So he's looking at it not just more than falling asleep in prayer, but something beyond that. And that something beyond that here is, one, that one should be of sound mind and attentiveness when they are performing any act, whether it's a devotional act, something like ibadah, or a non-devotional act. Why? Because it's not the act itself, right? What if you could program someone to pray, make up all their makeup prayers while they're asleep? They're a sleepwalker, and then we have some kind of device that can program them to do all of those things while they're asleep. Does it count? No, it doesn't. So it's not the acts, right? But it's the niyyah, the intention, what's behind them. Just like Imam Ahmed ibn al-Sakandari, he said that the al-a'mal surun qa'imah, right? The a'mal or the acts are just forms, upright forms. But their reality, their secret, is the secret of sincerity within them. Their ruh, their spirit, is the secret of sincerity within them. So, what type of secret can be in a prayer where one is fighting sleep and is not really aware of what they're doing? So then it becomes, it's not just about accumulating ibadah, right? And even our approach to how we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not really quantitative, it's qualitative. It's not how much you can do, it's not about, some people read the hadith of the ones that kind of encourage people to do meritorious acts. They read the hadith about how the prayer in Mecca or Haram is like 100,000 in any other mosque besides in Medina and Prophet's Mosque in Medina and Masjid al-Aqsa, or that the prayer in Medina is like 1,000 except for those other two. So they start calculating in their head, so that's 100,000 and 5, so that's 500,000 one day. That would be like if I prayed like 1,000 years or something, at home. So I'm you know how like you have the slot machine. Well, you don't know what this. Imagine the slot machine. When they put in the money and then the thing starts accumulating all these big numbers. So people have this like idea in their head that they're accumulating a lot of good deeds by virtue of the hadith that mention these type of things. But the point of these hadith is rather for us to become. It's a bishara, right? It's a glad tiding. It's a sign of Allah's rahmah, His lutf, His gentleness. Not something that we should look at in a purely, mathematical sense, and we're adding, add, subtract, where our ibadah goes, that type of thing. So it's better to offer 2 rak'ahs of sincere prayer, of prayer that has awareness, attentiveness, awareness of heart and mind, reverence within it, than to do much ibadah that doesn't penetrate the heart. Because the acts themselves, the ibadat, are actually wasa'il. They're means, they're not the ends. And they're means to have that influence and penetration upon the soul, upon the heart. So if your heart and soul are not even in it when you're doing it to begin with, then what type of influence, what type of benefit could you possibly derive from whatever particular ibadah that you're doing? So the Prophet ﷺ was giving that indication here, that it's better for one to go do something that's merely permissible, like sleep, in this case, than to pray, which we know is better than permissible. It's recommended, right? And even the adhan of Fajr says, as-salatu khayrun min an-nawm. So we know prayer is better than sleep. That's kind of ijma', yani consensus, unless something like this. So there's a natural assumption that when you are doing the prayer, that one is attempting to have that presence of mind, and that it's a means toward the ends of penetrating your heart, having an influence upon you. Prayer is meant to be a transformative act. Like all the ibadat, they're not meant for in of themselves. They're supposed to be transformative. So when one of the Sahaba asked, or one of the people outside of Medina asked the Prophet ﷺ about fasting during travel, and the Prophet said, لَيْسَ مِنَ الْبَرِّ الصِّيَامُ فِي السَّفَرِ. It's not from bir, for this particular person, to fast while traveling. Even though the Quran mentions in the very same issue, وَأَن تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. So how do you reconcile the two? It depends upon the person's particular situation. If you can fast while you're traveling and have that particular desired effect, which is that it influences you and it reaches you to taqwa, which is what the Quran says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may have taqwa. So if it's actually leading you to, like the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever has out of their fasting merely hunger and thirst, then it's as if they haven't fasted. That's not the point, to be hungry and thirsty. And the point from prayer is not to be sleepy and doing it begrudgingly and then forget that you even did it to begin with. So we should approach our ibadah like we want this thing to be transformative for us. And that's why the ulama say that one should remove any mashaghil, any distractions, whether literal distractions, like the TV's on in the same room, or things that are distracting you in your mind. You're worried about, you're waiting for a phone call, and so you're kind of praying, but at the same time, wait, what if the phone rings while I'm praying and this is a big deal on the phone call? You know what? If there's enough time and it's a long day in the summer and you can wait another hour to pray the Lord, then just wait. Get your phone call over with. Right? الوقت فيه متسع. Assuming that there is enough time within the prayer time period, it's better for you to delay it in this case and then pray it while you're in it, you're cognizant of it, than to be completely sort of thinking about something else while you're praying. And definitely that would be the case. This is even the fard prayer. We're even talking about the nawafil as well. Even in the fard, we'll come to the hadith later on. إذا حضر العشاء والعشاء فَقَدِّمُوا الْعَشَاء. Isha means the prayer, Asha means the dinner. Imam Ibn Jamrah, he later says that here, Maghrib and Isha are sometimes referred to as al-Isha'an, the two Ishas. So he thought that that hadith was talking about Maghrib even, not even Isha. And Maghrib, there's not a lot of time between that and Isha. So he said, hasten to eat, especially if it's breaking a fast at Maghrib time, and then pray. Then not be distracted about thinking about the food and what you're going to eat and how you're going to eat it and so forth. So the concept of getting out of it is that approach to ibadah should be, with a particular methodology of looking to see that it has that desired influence on the heart, that it has that effect. All of the ibadah are like that. Tasbih, tahleel, tahmeed, dhikr, reading the Quran. Right? If you get into a mode where it becomes like a routine and you're just doing it and you feel like it's not penetrating, right? One of the hadith says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَمِلُّ حَتَّى تَمَلُّ. If you get bored, then don't go into something because Allah will not get bored of you either. So the talween, right, which is the variation in the different types of devotional acts one may offer, is there for a reason. Being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing our nature, He created us, He knows that we get bored. So if it's only prayer, or only Quran, or only dhikr, or only fasting, or only this, or only that, some people might find an inclination to one over the other. And they seemingly correspond to the gates of heaven as well. So the gates of heaven have Bab al-Siyam, Bab al-Salah, Bab al-Sadaqah. Right, so those gates of heaven, for those people who sort of distinguished themselves in the way they gave sadaqah and the way they prayed, extra prayers, and so forth, those 8 gates of heaven, people will be called by a particular gate. Or some people may be called at every gate, as goes some of the hadith. That people, they got all of them. Someone like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who will be called from all 8. All 8 of the meritorious literal gates to heaven, which correspond to the pathways, I think, in terms of ibadat in this life. So, if you feel like it's not really having the effect that you want in the beginning, definitely you're going to struggle a little bit. Definitely it's not going to be the thing that you're looking for a while, but, you go through that. But if you get to a point where it becomes more of an adverse effect on you than a good one, then one has to think about, let me give it in the best way. It's not about quantity, but it's about quality. It's better to start making a routine of just giving 2 rak'ahs a day or 1 page of Quran a day, but do them perfectly. Do them right than quantity. Right? And because the maqsood, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one that you're looking for is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not the a'mal, not the acts, nor even the pleasure of following the divine and performing those acts. Because some people look for that too. That's not really the maqsood either. Right? Many people go to Hajj and Umrah, and then they have a particular transformative experience. They come back and they want to recreate whatever it was over there that gave them that transformative experience. So they'll like to listen to the imams who read in the haram, even though really they're not anywhere near any of the other qurra. But because they, in terms of their recitation and their itqan, their perfection, but because they're the ones who read in the haram, there's an association there that's made now that, these are the people that when I got transformed, they were the ones who were leading us in prayer and so forth. And maybe they'll wear the white thobe for a while afterwards, and the kufi and so forth, and which is a good thing. They want to keep that up, recreate it. But really, it's going to go away. It's not going to last, because that's not your matlub, nor your maqsood. That's not what's asked of you, and that's not what you seek either. What you seek is Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He gives us these things as modes of encouragement, but that's not what we should be after. So we're not looking for the opening, not looking for the enlightenment. We don't work for that. We work towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we only see these things as means to that end. So famous quote of Abu Hassan al-Shadili when he said, "من دلك على الدنيا فقد غشك ومن دلك على الأعمال أو على العمل فقد أتعبك ومن دلك على الله فقد نصحك." Whoever encouraged you towards the dunya has cheated you. Whoever encourages you toward the a'mal, yani specific acts, praying, fasting, so forth, has tired you out. But whoever leads you and encourages you toward Allah has given you true counsel, has given you true nasiha. And I think this is particularly important for us because oftentimes we think in terms of, is he praying enough? Is he praying right? Is she praying right? How many prayers are you doing? What type of outfit are they wearing? Does their hijab fit right? How long is his beard? These are all a'mal. These are all exterior, external acts. And they're not the ends. And perhaps by us overemphasizing these means, we lose sight of the ends. So kind of akin to not seeing the forest for the trees. We see the individual acts and we think that's the forest, but that's not it. You got to take a step back and look at the whole thing. And oftentimes people kind of underestimate others or belittle them or marginalize them because they don't fit a particular image they have of what a pious person looks like or what a good Muslim looks like. That in of itself is a big veil, a big barrier, keeping people from actually finding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many people who follow this type of route, they get burned out very quickly because they're expecting certain results, the results are not forthcoming, and so they give up on the whole project to begin with. And this path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So back to the hadith. So what was the advice of the Prophet ﷺ? He should rest until his sleepiness goes away. In other words, renew yourself, take a break, and then come back. There's no reason to push oneself to something where they're not involved on a spiritual level in it. It's not much good of a ibadah, devotional act, if there's no spiritual connection associated with it. Then he says something that kind of interesting. فإن أحدكم إذا صلى ونعس لا يدري لعله يستغفر فيسب نفسه. Some of you, if you pray while sleepy, you may try to make istighfar, yani something of the prayer dua, but end up cursing himself. So how do we understand that? They said, remember Ramla said in his commentary that if one is not aware of what they're saying in the prayer, then when they're making dua, when they're asking for something, they might say something, whereas they think it to be asking for a good thing, but it's actually quite the opposite. Or it could be asking for something that would lead to something akin to cursing himself. So if someone, makes dua against someone else or curses someone else, that's seen as a pathway for you to be cursed yourself. Like in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he said to some of the Sahaba, he told them, don't curse your parents. And they said, who curses his parents? Like, we didn't do that in Jahiliyyah, why would we do it? That's what they were thinking. He said, how does one curse their parents? He said, if you see someone and he curses you, then you curse his parent, and then they curse your parents as a result of you cursing them. So clearly he's saying don't get into that type of back and forth between someone, and keep in mind that your own actions can precipitate adverse actions happening to you, even though you didn't intend it to begin with. And all of that can happen either in the scenario of the hadith I just mentioned, which is anger, because when people are really angry, they kind of lose the sense of what they're saying and what they're doing. Or when people are asleep or very sleepy, a similar thing may happen. They may lose sense of what they're saying or what they're doing. So, and then the last point I think would be the point about sleep itself. Sleep is seen as kind of the lesser death. if death is the separation of the soul from the body on sort of a more permanent basis, at least until the Day of Judgment, then sleep is also a kind of a separation of the soul from the body, even if it's less permanent. Allah الذي يتوفى الأنفس حين موتها والتي لم تمت. Allah is the one who fulfills the souls of those that die and the ones that don't, but are in their sleep. But He returns them back after they wake up. Right? And even the dua for wakefulness, for being awake, it's put in terms of death and life. Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. Praise to the one who has given us life after death, and to Him we shall return. So, I think we'll move on to the next one, unless there's any. Yes.
So is it better or worse to pray, let's say, for Fajr? Because I know, especially when I was nursing, and there are times where I just go to sleep really late and really exhausted. I just kind of pray while yawning. But then because I just hear that hadith in my head, that it's better for me. So is it better? Is it okay to sleep through if you're that exhausted?
Not an obligatory prayer, not to that extent.
Okay.
This particular hadith is talking about someone who was like a night prayer, which means it's a extra prayer. But obviously the obligatory prayers, we're not talking about that. And that would only be the case in as much as you have enough time to do that. In the case of Fajr, it's also not a long time for between that and sunrise, between Fajr dawn and sunrise. So it has to be done within the time. People's sleep regime also, people have to think about how they sleep too. The Prophet ﷺ, it's described how his sleep was, and he had a couple of different sleep patterns. One of the sleep patterns he would sleep in the beginning of the night. Here, beginning of the night means after Isha, right? Because we consider the night from Maghrib to Fajr. And so he would divide the night usually in sixths, either in thirds or in sixths. So sometimes he would sleep the first third of the night. Then he would wake up and pray for some time, and then he would go back to sleep, and then he would wake up again for the last sixth. That's a possible pattern. Sometimes he would change it. But it's clear that his night was divided between sleep and prayer in something, and that it wasn't usually a straight, like 7 or 8 hour sleep. And he also encouraged people to take the qaylula. He said, قِيلُ فَإِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَا يَقِيلُ. Qilu means sleep during the afternoon siesta, which is considered generally between sometime after Dhuhr and before Asr. And that actually was a very common practice, not just for Muslims, but people living in the Mediterranean a lot. People still talk of the afternoon siesta, and their day was divided differently. People used to not sleep after Fajr. So the day would start quite early, and then let's say their working day would extend all the way until Dhuhr. And if you look at like today, Fajr was like 4 or 5 o'clock now. So let's say they start work at 6, and they go all the way till 1 o'clock. That's 7 hours, that's a work day, right? And then they would work until that time. Then there would be a rest time after the Dhuhr, right? Either food would be served after Dhuhr, then the rest time, which usually is the case, and then they wake up, and then actually after that afternoon siesta, the rest of the day is like a second day. Same thing with the night. So they would sleep some part of the night, wake up for some part of the night, be awake, and then they'd sleep the latter part of the night and then wake up again before Fajr. So they had like 2 nights and 2 days. And modern man, that's very difficult to implement now because of the way our work schedules are, and just artificial light has a lot to do with it. even if people wanted to sleep, sometime very shortly after Isha, it's just with all of this distraction. Used to be people who, there are some parts of the world that only recently got electricity, but before they got electricity, it was very natural to sleep after Isha, because there's nothing to do. What are you going to do? There's no TV, no lights, right? And sometimes I think about it, I'm astounded how these ulama got to where they were. And they don't have any of the modern conveniences we have. They didn't have electricity, they didn't have pens. They had to, ink well, and it was a mess. They didn't have libraries, they didn't have written books. If they wanted a book, they'd have to get what's called a warraq, or a specialist, a copyist, to copyright their book by hand, which was sometimes very expensive. And they had traveled a lot, they didn't have cars, travel was difficult, but yet they did it somehow, subhanAllah. But we have all of this convenience, but sometimes we feel like we have no time, or we don't know how to use the time. Yes?
This might be a minor point, but as the time for Fajr adjusts and it moves, sometimes it's within 1 week, a difference sometimes cumulatively, 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you get into a pattern of getting up a certain time. And sometimes, you can be late for Fajr because of a pattern that you have not adjusted by sometimes 5-10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advise us on that?
That's interesting, because some people think the modern timekeeping kind of was one of the worst inventions ever to happen. Because it makes you feel like you're out of sync with things like prayer. But the way the ancients used to do, the pre-moderns, was their sync was the prayer. So they didn't say, I'm going to meet you at 10 o'clock. They would say, I'll meet you after Isha, whatever Isha would be. Or I'll meet you at Asr, meet you at this time. So their time schedules were always in sync, rhythmic with the actual prayer times themselves. And there wasn't a separate timekeeping system outside of that was in conflict with it, which is what we have today, right? Because you got to get to go work at 9 o'clock, summer, winter, doesn't matter, or 8 o'clock, whatever it might be, and then you try to adjust with the prayer times themselves. So it's not easy to do. I think probably the easiest route for us would be, obviously, people and their commitments to work and just the fact of life, that's kind of hard to negotiate. But the things that they have outside of that, their time at home in the evenings, I think this is where people have some room for improvement, where they can, people don't know, are not aware of this, or they may be, but it's makruh, it's actually religiously disliked to stay awake after Isha, unless you're doing something that's considered beneficial. So staying up late to watch your favorite TV program, or to, go to the whatever people go to, that type of thing. Unless there's some type of real benefit out of that, it's disliked. It's makruh. It's not haram, but unless it's a haram activity. But one of the reasons it's going to be disliked is because it may keep you from waking up for Fajr. If you know that you're not going to wake up for Fajr if you stay up to a certain time and choose to do so anyway, that's borderline haram. I'm not going to say it's haram. But if you know yourself, and you kind of are a little bit lackadaisical about, I'll wake up, we'll see. But you know from yourself, your pattern is that it will be hard for you to wake up if you sleep after a certain time. You have to question someone's commitment who's doing that. So the next one, we get into some issues of tahara, or removal of impurities. Last week we mentioned there's two types. Those who weren't with us, we talked about taharat al-hadath and taharat al-khabath. So the ritual purity, which is more of a legalistic one than a literal one, which means either being in a state of wudu in order to offer the prayer, and to circumambulate the Kaaba, make tawaf, and to touch the pages of the Quran. Those three in particular, one is required to be in a state of ritual purity. And then additionally, there's another type of tahara called al-khabath, which is dealing with the place of prayer, your clothing, and your physical body. So the cleanliness, lack of impurities on your physical body, that's distinct from taharat al-hadath. Some people conflate the two sometimes. So they'll say, if I got urine on me, or the baby's urine, or someone in a diaper, you'll have to make wudu. No, absolutely not. Because that doesn't affect your own ritual purity. All it is a najasa, an impure thing that just merely needs to be washed off or removed. So, in najasat, things that are considered to be impure must be removed upon offering the prayer. That's the majority opinion. There's another equally dominant opinion in the Maliki school that says that it's a sunnah, an obligation to remove impurities from their clothing, from the place of prayer, and so forth when they pray. That ruling probably goes back to, I would use it for people who are in the type of situation where it's kind of really difficult to remove, to be constantly vigilant of removing impurities from their clothing in the place of prayer and things like this. And you might say, oh, how's that possible? Yeah, if you've ever been to the desert, or if you've ever been to places where water is not easily accessible, or it's difficult to get, or, there are still many places in the African continent, for example, people walk kilometers every day to get water back and forth. So water is a luxury almost. So to use it, I'd have to use it to remove impurities, especially when you're around livestock, farm animals, things like this that would be sources of those impurities, then it becomes difficult, it becomes hard. And considering that you may not have another change of clothes. It's hard for us to fathom that, but there are people who don't have a change of clothes. What they wear is what they got. So the ruling is there for people, I think, to alleviate in those particular situations. But generally speaking, any type of impurity should be removed from one's clothing. And we said that most human bodily excretions will be najas, will be considered something that's impure, that has to be removed, so it's on one's clothing or body. Most animal excretions also will be considered in that category. The Maliki school in particular has an exception to that, where they say any animal whose meat is eaten, then their feces and their urine is considered to be pure, assuming they don't eat najasa. So that would include goats, sheep, cows, camels. Their urine and their feces are considered to be pure. So if one were to step on it or get on them, it's technically not considered to be najasa, not considered to be impure. The Shafi'is say no, it's impure. So there's some difference of opinion about that. Any liquid intoxicant is impure. Liquid intoxicant, so wine, rum, tequila, all of that. Yeah.
Does that Maliki opinion include birds? Urine or feces of birds?
Mm-hmm. Chicken, duck. Assuming they don't eat that the stamina najasa doesn't eat najasa, then that would be the case. So that's kind of it's not a dispensation, it's a ruling in the school. It's not like a rukhsa, but it works for people who might be around livestock and work on farms and things like that. So, but here this hadith عن عائشة رضي الله عنها أنها كانت تغسل المنية من ثوب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم أراه فيه بقعة أو بقعة. So Aisha narrated that she used to wash the semen from the garment of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, then see it on him with a stain or more. Not on him, it doesn't really say that, but see it as a stain or more than one stain. So here we talked about this a few hadith back about how certain things, generally speaking, we don't mention them outright specifically. It's kind of from the etiquette and the adab, except if there is a ruling that cannot be understood in another way. And in that aspect, when they say, for example, لا حياء في الدين, They don't mean there's no modesty, period, but modesty as when it comes to understanding particular rulings, then there's a more important principle at stake here, namely to understand the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather than observing a very important principle as well, which is to be modest in speech and in action and deed and so forth, but not at the cost of not understanding what the hukm of Allah, the ruling here is. So here we also see that the idea that the actions of the Sahaba are also a type of proof and sometimes definitive. So there's no mention of the Prophet ﷺ here saying this about her or him actually doing something in this hadith. It's only saying Aisha used to wash his clothing. But it's understood from the context that what Aisha did here is not just something specific to her, but it's something that is part of the deen, right? So that, as we said, I teach so many classes, I can't remember where I said things, but one of the principles is that which the Prophet ﷺ remained silent about is seen as his tacit approval. So if she was doing this and he felt that it was not the right thing to do, then he would not have allowed her to do it. So either one of two things here. Either he told her to do it this way, which is most likely. It's not something that it's up to a sort of personal judgment, right? Because we're talking about something that's very specific to ibadah. So he most likely, there's a backstory to this that's not mentioned, that he instructed her to do so. And then the narrator who narrates from Aisha, radiallahu anha, got this from her, and then that is understood that she did this by instruction from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And of course the lesser possibility is that she did this and he approved of the way that she was doing it. But more likely the first. So, this idea of shyness in these affairs, as we said, doesn't apply when we're talking about matters of the deen. So here we're looking at a very specific removal of najasa from clothing. Removal of najasa from clothing. And the general principle is that the athar has to be removed, if not necessarily the original, what's called al-ayn, or the stain itself. So the athar means the remnants of it. And the way that they know that the remnants of it has been removed, if it is rinsed with water, and then the water that comes out of what's being rinsed is not changed in property, neither in its taste or its smell or its color, those three, then the item is considered to be tahir, even if you see a stain, even if there's a stain on it. Because what's applicable here is removing whatever remnants of it, and not necessarily the stain if it's very difficult to remove the stain. And this is it's a rahmah, it's something that has been made for this ummah to be easy. Previous nations didn't have this. It's something unique to the Muslim nation, or the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of the stories that are narrated on Bani Israel say that they didn't have this. They would have to cut out the clothes themselves or get a new pair of clothes if a stain of najasa would come on it. They couldn't just simply wash it. So, as regards to the stain itself, then that is to be washed off. In a hadith, I think that comes in two hadith, which will come in the next hadith, so we'll get to that then. But if the stain becomes dry, right, so if it was like urine, or if it was something that can form a cake-like substance, once it becomes dry, or semen or something like that, then the better thing to do would be to rub it to remove that and then wash it. Because if you just wet it, you wet it again and then it would spread more. So it's, al-farq, which is to rub it, get the dry stain out, and then to wash it with water. And it has to be washed with pure water. So if you use soapy, sudsy water, and you don't use water in of itself, you may have kind of washed it, but in terms of what is the ritual removal of najasa, you haven't done that. It has to be done with what's called ma' mutlaq, which means water that is unchanged in its intrinsic properties. So, yeah, not that anyone would, but you can't use coconut water or watermelon water or even stain remover. You can use that, that's fine to remove the stain. But in terms of the ruling of this thing having najasa on it, you can't just use stain removal. You have to use water itself.
Except for the Hanafis.
We're not talking about that. Tamam? They say that?
The Hanafis, they take the word mat, and their interpretation of the word mat is liquid instead of water. So
Well,
anything that's
they're not saying that don't use water, but they have a wider definition of what
so
water
anything
is.
that has water qualities.
Yeah. So their water is more like a say, liquid. That's true. So she would do that, she would wash it, and even though she would still see the stain, then that's not important. The important thing is that she washed it in that particular manner.
Would tayammum be applicable here?
I'm sorry?
Would tayammum, cleansing with sand?
No.
Where?
Tayammum is only for ritual purification. If one is in a situation where they don't have access at that particular time to water and they have nothing else to change into to pray, then they pray with that. Because even in the opinion that removal of impurity is an obligation, under two conditions. One, both conditions at the same time. One, that one has the ability to remove it, and two, one is aware of it. You know, let's say you're walking down the street and, New York City Central Park, pigeons, and they spray you, and you don't feel it on your back. And then you go to the masjid, pray Jum'ah, you get out, and then the guy's like, oh, akhi, you got like pigeon stuff all over your back. What do you do at that point? We tell them you don't have to repeat the prayer. If it's still within the time, it's recommended to do so, but technically you don't have to repeat it. Why? Because you were not aware that there was najasa on you. So when you entered into the prayer, you had a certainty there was not. Turned out later you didn't, but nevertheless, you entered into the prayer and did it in the way according to the best of your knowledge. So when we talk about tahara, when we talk about ibadah, it's always according to the best of your knowledge, not how it is in reality. Because if we were judged to be how it exactly is in reality, well, there's so many loopholes in that. There's so many ways that I could not be aware. And so what's only humanly possible in terms of taklif, of what we're obligated to do, is that which I can have certainty about. Things I cannot have certainty about, or certainty is difficult to acquire, it's not required. Don't have to go that length.
Well, I'm sorry, I just want to understand something. So if this is sort of related, it's not about garments, but if you are fasting and you get your menstruation, but you weren't aware of it, and then Maghrib came, would you have to repeat the day?
Definitely.
Even though you weren't aware of it and you went the whole fast? Just because you became impure at one point?
If you're certain that it happened before Maghrib, even after the fact, you have to repeat the day. But let's say, for some reason, you weren't aware that it happened, and you made an assumption that it happened after Maghrib, but, in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, it's written that it did happen before Maghrib. Then what? No. To your knowledge, you believe it happened after Maghrib, khalas. But if you have doubt, before or after, then you have to go with the doubt at this point and repeat the day. So either doubt or certainty before Maghrib, then the day would have to be repeated. So one other point here that Ibn Abu Jamrah makes, which I think is important, is Sayyidah Aisha, she narrates, or this is narrated on her, Prophet ﷺ said about her, خُذُوا نِصْفَ دِينَكُمْ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْحُمَيْرَةِ, take half of your deen from this red-cheeked one interpretation. Yani Sayyidah Aisha, she is considered one of the greatest Muslims, fuqaha, one of the greatest women ever. All those superlatives we can say about her. But nevertheless, here she is washing the garment of, in this case, it's the Prophet ﷺ, but also her husband. And Imam Abu Jamrah, he said, this gives permissibility. He didn't say obligation. He said it's permissible for a woman to serve her husband in that manner. Because I have to tell them, sorry, it's not an obligation. They don't have to. It's not part of the marriage understanding that the woman has to serve the husband and cook for him and clean his stuff and all that. It's a custom. It may be customary in certain cultures, and custom is given its due. So people enter into a marriage and they never talk about that, but their particular custom is that's kind of what is expected. Then there's a reasonable expectation on both parties that this is the way it's going to turn out. That's fine. But if we're talking about, a completely legal aspect, is it part of her marriage responsibility to serve her husband? Definitely not. And definitely not his guests or his friends either. So really you look at that in terms, it's a voluntary thing. So here, say that Aisha is doing this voluntarily. So the point is, one, she didn't have to, it's permissible. Two, she didn't see it as beneath her either. So I have to tell them that too. It's not beneath her, right? Because khidmah, serving others, it's an elevated rank, it's an elevated station. People who serve others, we have the wrong idea about them. We tend to say, oh, he's a servant. Yeah, but that's a big deal to be a servant, to serve. Right? We kind of put it on a pedestal when we say serve in public office, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance all about it. But what about the people who serve you at the drive-thru, or in the restaurant, or the waitress? They serve too, right? And it's an elevated thing. It's a thing when you are doing service for someone else, right? That's actually more akin to, I think, to God consciousness, to taqwa, to self-actualization, realization. How? Because when you serve others, it puts you outside of the idea of you're the most important thing, and that you only have to deal with yourself and tend to your needs and your thing. But part of our understanding of this deen is when we serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's about huwa, not ana. Right? Qul huwa Allahu ahad. There's no ana. So the further you can get away from the ana, from the me, from the I, and one of the paths towards doing that is service to others. Definitely. A woman can very legitimately look at even serving her family, including her husband and children, as a path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why I would like to see it. Not that you're serving that person per se, but via service, it's a training for your own soul. Right? Because if you can't get yourself to serve those who have rights upon you, how can you claim to serve Allah? How can you claim to serve God? Right? If you think you can serve Allah, but the rest of creation can go to somewhere else, then you completely misunderstood the point. So, and by the same token, there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ كان في خدمة أهله في بيته. He used to serve في خدمة, in service of his family at the same time. So he would also serve them. So it was a mutual relationship. So our relationships, all of them, should never be seen as one up, one down. It's always a relationship of mutual benefit. So whether you're the one being served or the one who is serving, both people are benefiting, not just from each other, but from the actualization of that relationship. It's kind of a microcosm of your service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you give to the needy person, you're not really giving to them, right? You're taking. Like when Aisha remarked about the sheep that was slaughtered, and she said, ذهب ثلثه, 2/3 went. No, he would say, بقي ثلثه. What remained is the 2/3, not the 2/3. Because what remains is what remains with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you didn't really give it away, you're actually adding to us when you gave it to someone else. Right? So it's not just a physical acts, but you're actually giving you're actually receiving when you are giving. So service to other human beings has to be seen in that light. And the Arabs used to say, Sayyidul Qawm Khadimuhum. Right? The leader of a people is the one who serves them. So the whole idea about khidmah, service, I think we have a very antiquarian, European 19th century way of looking at it. Oh, he's a servant. He serves me. That's not our paradigm. That's not how it was with the Muslims at all. That's something that we got from other cultures, where we're seeing one up, one down, and the servant is less, and so forth. But for us, the servant, the one who puts himself out there, it's kind of it's an elevated rank. So I think we have a few minutes to Isha. Maghrib, sorry. It is Isha, right? It's one of the names. Isha and. So we'll break here and then we'll come back after for Hadith 22 and 23. Inshallah.
You give me khutbah tomorrow, right?
No.
Watch the time.